Yes, thank you, Lauren, for the wonderful introduction. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Lauren Figarelli, and I am a project manager here at Pioneer B1. I will be your main presenter today, but Oren is going to join me as well to provide some additional feedback. Oren, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Oren, president of Pioneer B1, and we have monthly webinar series. Thank you everybody for joining, and we appreciate your feedback. So any future webinars you may want us to include in the future, let us know. That really help us understand what you guys are looking to enhance your education on. And all our webinars are available online, and you should get a link, and it's also available on our YouTube channel.
Yes, and as we go along, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat, and we will also allow for some Q&A time at the end. As always, this session will be recorded and available on our YouTube channel, as Oren had shared. So beginning today, we're looking to essentially provide you, the SAP Business One users, with an understanding of using the fixed assets module out of the box in SAP.
And one of the things to just understand, first there are multiple companies that have different needs of fixed assets. Some companies don't have too much complexity with fixed assets, so you may want to talk to your CPA at the end of the year, beginning of following year, understand what is the depreciation, and just add one journal entry to reflect it. Other companies may need to do that on a monthly basis. What we are going to share here is how SAP do that in an automatic way throughout the year, and how to utilize a more robust management of fixed assets. Second thing to mention, it is the financial fixed assets management module. What it means is you can buy the asset, you can depreciate, you can retire, and things of that nature, like Lauren will walk us through. But it does not design to do maintenance schedules and things of that nature. We can enhance that by adding UDFs to the fixed assets master data, and have alerts to remind you on different maintenance schedules, and even utilize the service module available out of the box. But conceptually, the features that are available out of the box and what we're going to discuss today are more related to the financial management of the fixed assets.
Yes, so to begin, I'd just like to review kind of what we're going to go over before we get started. Our agenda today looks like we are going to dive into the configuration and setup of the fixed assets module. We'll also look at creating and importing fixed assets into SAP, as well as a few transactions like capitalization, depreciation runs, and retirement. We'll take a look at the out-of-the-box reporting, share some documentation, and of course, we'll hopefully have some time for a question and answer at the end. To begin, we're going to take a look at the configuration and setup of the fixed assets, which includes enabling the fixed assets and running through a few different setups, which include account determination, depreciation types, depreciation areas, asset classes, and attribute groups.
So we really start with a setup, and then we'll go into master data, and then into transaction. We start with the setup now.
Yes. So the first thing we need to do in the setup is to go ahead into the system initialization in our administration module, and we're going to go into company details. On the company details, we're going to go to the basic initialization tab, and at the way bottom, there is a setting here to enable fixed assets. By default, this box is unchecked whenever you create a company in SAP. In order to use the module, it's as simple as checking this box, and then you have some options on how you want to calculate your depreciation on a month or day basis. Most companies are going to go ahead and use a monthly basis, so that's what we're going to demonstrate today in our webinar.
And once you check that box, you may need to do that after hours when users are out, because it will add some menu to the finance module. So that will be visible right after you enable the fixed assets module.
Yes, and just a reminder, as everything else that we kind of implement that's, a new process particularly, it's always best to go ahead and implement it and kind of test it in the sandbox. That way you're getting the results that you're expecting, and you know what you're prepared for when you enable it in the live database.
The second thing, as you can see, that box now is grayed out. It means once you started to work with that, you cannot uncheck that. So highly recommend Lauren's suggestion to test everything in Sandbox, do all the mistakes, and before enabling that in the production company.
Yes. And after you've enabled the fixed assets module, as Oren shared, you have now some additional menu items and documents and things of that nature. So what we need to do is we need to go and kind of set that up. That's all under the administration and the setup folder, under financials and fixed assets. So there's 5 different setup options here, and we're going to kind of walk through each one of them. The first one is the account determination. The account determination, as you know, in SAP, everything flows through journal entries and general ledger transactions, and that's no different here for the fixed assets. So it's really important to get your account determination set up first. Some companies will have one kind of set of fixed asset accounts in their general ledger setup. However, we really recommend best practices to have different groupings of those accounts, specifically related to different groupings of your fixed assets. In this case, I have one for my motor vehicles, and I specifically have all of my assets, even the asset balance sheet account related to the motor vehicles, and even my depreciation related to the motor vehicles. I could, and I recommend, that you create one for each grouping. And even if it's as simple as duplicating the majority of these accounts and then just changing a few of them, you can right-click and duplicate to set up, for example, fixed assets related to machines. And then it's as easy as changing your GL account. These are going to flow through on the fixed asset transactions, so this step, is pretty important. After you've set up your account determination, the next step is to go to your depreciation types. The depreciation types are essentially determining your methods for which you depreciate your fixed assets. The most common method used is straight line, so we're going to use that throughout the rest of this presentation. But in SAP, you have the ability to calculate many different methods of depreciation types, including declining balance. If you have any type of immediate write-off, they have those methods available for you. In addition, you can decide exactly when your depreciation during your periods are going to be posted. Some companies choose to post at the beginning of the period, some at the end, and some prefer on an exact daily base. But there are a lot of settings that you can kind of define around this area, and again, that's why we recommend kind of testing this in the sandbox before you go live. And again, these depreciation types are going to be used in an additional setup. So I always like to go right down the menu. The next area we're going to take a look at is actually the depreciation areas. The depreciation areas essentially define how your fixed asset transactions are going to post or not post to your general ledger. What I mean by that is you can define one or multiple depreciation areas that are going to post to your general ledger account, and one or more that are going to be internal, and they're not going to post to your general ledger accounts. The most common that a lot of companies use are GAAP, and that's going to say that it's going to post to the general ledger account, and it's one of our main depreciation areas. This most commonly will apply to all of your fixed asset items. As I go down the list here, we have a few different settings. One is the posting of depreciation, direct versus indirect. Most companies use indirect with an accumulated depreciation account and the use of that during your depreciation. However, if you choose to just simply reduce your asset account, you can do that as well, and that would be the direct posting. The other option here is the posting of retirement, gross versus net, and that just relates to the accounts that you determine on your account determination. The one thing I really wanted to point out is the other type of depreciation area, which is internal. This internal depreciation area can be used to test the effects of using different depreciation methods if you're interested in potentially changing a depreciation area at the end of your fiscal year. So what this does internally is it does not post to the general ledger account, but when doing depreciation runs, it can allow you to see, hey, normally I post my main depreciation area versus for straight line, but I'm interested in seeing how maybe double declining balance would work. And you can use that internally so that it doesn't post, but you can still forecast and kind of see how the effects of that method would work. The next setup is asset classes, and this is a really, really important one. Asset classes are essentially groupings of items, groupings of assets, I should say, that have similar settings or similar useful life or depreciation methods. And it's easiest to kind of group them together to use as default settings. For the asset classes, again, this is why I recommended that it's best as well if you can have multiple account determinations, because we will set them here. For asset classes, you can define one or multiple depreciation areas. So again, here I can see that I have one that's going to post to my general ledger, and I have one for my internal method. In addition, I can set for my depreciation area that's posting to the general ledger exactly what my account determination is. I can define my depreciation type. In this case, I'm using my motor vehicle straight line depreciation. And here I'm going to enter my useful life, which in this case is 6 years, but I need to post it in months because that was my original setting when I enabled the module. The one thing that's important to point out about these asset classes are that these are not set in stone. For example, I have motor vehicles here, and I could, as we see today, I'll be entering multiple fixed assets for different trucks and cars. However, not every vehicle is going to have, for example, the same useful life of 6 years. One could have 7, 10, for example. This is essentially just acts as a template when you're going to go create your fixed assets in the asset master data, as we'll see in a few minutes. If you're familiar with the bill of materials in SAP and how that acts as a template or a default for your production order, this is very similar to the assets, because you can then go and update it on an asset per asset basis in the asset master data. And oh, go ahead, Oren.
Yeah, go ahead.
Lastly, we have the attributes group. And I'm going to just kind of go to the end here. What these are just additional fields to store more information about. What I've done is I also like to group these per my asset class or groupings of assets. And they really just extend the data that you can enter on the asset master data. And you can see here that we have 64 of them, similar to the properties, but they're going to actually allow you to kind of type in a value per asset. So just some additional functionality.
Right, this is exactly where you could basically add the maintenance potentially for different types of assets using one of those attributes.
Yes, exactly.
Any questions so far?
Yeah, so what we've reviewed here on the configuration and setup is the initial enablement, the account determination, depreciation types or methods, depreciation areas, asset classes, and attribute groups. After we've done our initial setup, we can now begin to create our fixed assets. In SAP Business One, there are two different ways to do it. One is manually creating the fixed assets within SAP. This is done if you have already gone live with the module and it's kind of ad hoc as you're purchasing or acquiring new fixed assets. On the other hand, you can import to SAP. And if you're looking to implement this module, especially during the middle of a fiscal year, this is actually the way you have to do it with the import to SAP. So we're going to take a look at both of those options now. Okay. Now in SAP, the fixed assets are actually under the financial section, under the fixed assets folder, and we're going to go ahead here to the asset master data. We're going to add a new fixed asset. The first thing that you're going to notice here is that this form looks extremely similar to the item master data, almost identical. You have your usual tabs such as your general, purchasing, sales. The one main difference here is that we do have a new tab smack dab in the middle called fixed assets. And within that tab, we do have multiple sub-tabs. Not to skip these tabs because it's kind of up to you and your company to determine if the completion of those fields are very important. But for purposes of today, we're going to go straight into the fixed assets tab. Here, the first thing you'll notice is the status. On fixed assets, there are three different statuses. There's new, indicating that we're manually creating it and we haven't capitalized it and put it into use yet. As soon as we capitalize this fixed asset, you'll see that it changes to an active status, and when we retire it, it's going to change to an inactive status. The next thing down the line is the famous asset classes that I was referring to earlier. Here, I'm going to go ahead and choose my motor vehicles asset class, and you'll see that it automatically populated with my active depreciation area, which was GAAP, and it defaulted my depreciation type and useful life. If I don't want 72 months, if it's different, again, I can simply go ahead and increase it to 84 months. And I could also change my depreciation type here as well. So you're not really stuck with the ones that were listed under the asset class. The next thing you can define is an asset group, which is again just another grouping. If you want to group them in a different way for any type of reporting purposes, that's kind of where you'd use it. You have some additional fields related to serial numbers. A lot of companies for fixed assets like to track those, as well as location and if this car is related to any certain employee. The one thing to note is the next field is the capitalization date. If you're creating a manual fixed asset here, I usually don't populate this capitalization date. When you go to actually do the capitalization, as we'll get to in a few minutes, it's going to override what you put in that date anyways, and it's going to kind of populate that for you. So usually if I'm just manually creating it, I skip it for right now. But with not much other data, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to add this fixed asset. Now there are a few more things I wanted to show on this asset master data. I'm going to go to a different truck that I have, truck 2, which has some depreciation posted to it. On the right-hand side on the overview tab here, you're going to get a quick overview of what the depreciation and the high-level information about this fixed asset is per fiscal year. So I can change this if I want to go back and see what my 2019 data was, and it's going to refresh. So you have the ability to quickly at a glance just see the data that you need. If I go to the values subtab, this is essentially monitoring the changes in the value of an asset over the course of one fiscal year. So we have the different types of transactions that can post to this fixed asset, and it'll show you kind of what is planned for the fiscal year and how that affects your end net book value. And again, similar to the other tab, I can change this and I can look at how 2019 looked from that perspective. As you can see, I did acquire it during this year. The depreciation tab is really awesome. It's going to show you what the planned depreciation is over the course of a single fiscal year, as well as what was posted, and if it was done automatically through a depreciation run, or if it was done manually. And again, we can change it by fiscal year. And if we have another depreciation area, such as internal, this is where we can see how different depreciation methods are going to affect our books potentially. I'm going to just quickly go over the cost accounting tab. If your fixed asset is related to any type of project or cost accounting distribution rule, you can enter these here and they will flow through to your fixed asset transactions. And last but not least here is the attributes tab. Again, before you could see that I had make, model, year, and warranty years as my attribute group. And here I have the ability to go ahead and enter what those are per item. So it's just extending a little bit of the functionality here. The other thing to point out, kind of before we go away from this, is that there is this additional checkbox here for virtual item. We're not going to go in depth over it right now, but when we get to the documentation at the end, I'm going to share a link with you for a really nice video that kind of explains how this is used in depth. So that essentially is going to cover the manual creation of a fixed asset in the asset master data. And now I want to go over to what it looks like to import your fixed assets. If you're familiar with SAP's import from Excel functionality, this is just an extension of it. So essentially what you do is this is going to be used when you have when you're implementing fixed assets in the middle of a fiscal year. The key to this functionality is that you have to import your balances at the beginning of a fiscal year. So right now we're at the end of February, but in order to import my fixed assets that have some data and numbers behind them, I actually have to import them as of January 1st. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this with you, and I'm also going to be happy to, share this with you with the other materials, just so you have a starting point. Here I'm going to enter my item number and description, as well as my asset class. Really important to note that a lot of these values here go based off of code and not the description. So if you remember, my asset class was motor vehicles, but here my code is MV, so that's what I need to enter in my template. I'm going to enter my capitalization date, which happens to be the 1st of November, and it has to be in that year, month, day format. My depreciation area is GAAP. My depreciation start date just happens to be the same as the capitalization date. And I'm going to hop now to my useful life. Again, this is in months per my initial configuration of the fixed assets, so 6 years or 72 months. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Again, I mentioned that this has to be imported as of the first day of the fiscal year. In my case, that's January 1st. So at the point of January 1st, I have depreciated 2 months already, and I have 70 months remaining. My depreciation type, again, is the code for straight line. I'm going to enter my APC, which is my acquisition and production costs. So that's the amount that I essentially acquired this truck for. And again, my accumulated ordinary depreciation is going to be the balance of that as of January 1st. And we'll kind of see how that's important as we go on. If you're familiar with the import from Excel functionality, you have to delete. If you have header columns, you'll have to delete them, and then you'll have to save this file as a TXT file before importing. If we hop back over to SAP, we'll take a look at how we import that file. That's actually in the administration, data import, export, data import, and import fixed asset master data from Microsoft Excel. Again, here you can see right off the bat, they're asking you what fiscal year you want to import into. In our case, we're going to go with 2020, and it's going to be the first day, so January 1st of 2020. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select my file for import, which is my text file. And here, in all of these columns from Excel, I want to map what field in SAP they go to. So if you remember, I started with item number, item description, etc. When I populate all of these once, I can essentially save a template. That way, I can bring it up later if I need to import again for any reason. I have these all populated in my fixed assets import, so I'm going to select those, and you can see how easily they pre-populated. So it saves you a little bit of time, which is nice. I'm going to go ahead and uncheck this box. We're not dealing with business partner groups. And I'm going to go ahead and click import. When I do, hopefully I get the green bar of success that I have one record that imported successfully. If for any reason there's an error, you will see that as well pop up in a separate window, pointing you to what needs fixed in your import template. Overall, it's really important to note that this import doesn't create any journal entry transactions. It simply just creates that asset master data with those balances kind of tied to it, but there's no journal entries at this point that are created. And really important to note before we kind of move on from this topic, if you're using this during the middle of your fiscal year to import your fixed assets, again, they're going to import as of January 1st, for example. But you could have potentially already depreciated for 2 months via just journal entries. So at the end of the day, you're going to have to run a depreciation run, which you'll see in a bit. And just an FYI that you may have to do some reversal entries just to make sure that the fixed asset module and your general ledger are in sync and in balance with each other. But if you have specific questions about that, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to have a conversation offline about that. So overall, we have taken a look here at how we create and import fixed assets into SAP. Are there any questions at this point? No? Okay. Now that
you muted everyone, so any questions in the chat, please?
Yes.
Yeah, but go ahead, Lauren.
Yeah, sure. So after we've created these fixed assets, we're now going to run through some of the transactions that are available in SAP. Those include the asset capitalization, and we're going to show you that through the AP invoice document, as well as the depreciation runs, which are these automatic depreciation calculations and postings that are done through SAP. And lastly, we'll take a look at what an asset retirement looks like from an AR invoice and retirement perspective. Okay, so if I hop back over to SAP now, we're going to first capitalize one of our assets. And in this case, we're going to record the purchase of it as well. You can do that directly through an AP invoice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to enter my vendor that I'm purchasing this vehicle from. And I'm going to enter a posting date of today's date. Actually, let's do it a little bit different. Let's take it back to maybe December 1st. And I'm going to enter my item that I'm ready to depreciate, which is truck 1 that we just created earlier, or that I'm ready to purchase, I should say. And I'm going to enter the cost of this to be $15,000. Now, one key point to note here is that if you're using an AP invoice to purchase and capitalize your fixed assets, the capitalization date is always going to be your posting date for the AP invoice. Now, if for some reason your capitalization date is different than this posting date, SAP, of course, has a solution for that. And under the Accounting tab, there's actually an asset value date here. So you could change this value as you're creating the AP invoice, and that's going to become your capitalization date. So it's automatically defaulting based on my posting date, but I can update that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add this AP invoice. And when I do so, and I come back, we're going to quickly just go ahead and look at we're actually going to look at the relationship map first. I'm going to right click here and go to relationship map. So what I did was I created the AP invoice to record that and my liability against my vendor, but what SAP did in the background is it recognized that that was a fixed asset that I was purchasing, and it automatically created a linked capitalization document to recognize that my asset has been capitalized. Now, just briefly, on the AP invoice, the journal entry for the AP invoice is of course going to record my liability, and then there's actually going to be a debit for the amount going to some sort of clearing account. Because what's taken over then, if I look at my capitalization document, in the journal entry, I've now credited my clearing account, essentially clearing out that balance, and that is what actually posts to my asset account on the balance sheet, is that capitalization document. So if for some reason it looks a little odd to you, it's because we're using that, it automatically creates that additional document, and it's just using a clearing account. And that clearing account is set in your account determination for fixed assets. And real briefly, I want to take a look at this fixed asset now. If I look at the fixed asset tab for truck 1, if you remember when I initially created it, it was new status. It has now changed to active since we've capitalized it, and you can see my capitalization date is posted here. And it's kind of locked in based on those documents. So now that we've capitalized an asset, I want to take a look at the actual depreciation. That again is back under my financials and fixed assets folder. Now in SAP, you have the ability to run a manual depreciation for any item, for any amount, on any date. However, the best part about this module by far is the depreciation runs. This is essentially going to automatically calculate your depreciation based on the settings that we defined earlier, such as your depreciation type or method, and the correct GL accounts. As you can see here on this initial window, I have had a few previous depreciation runs, so they're always saved for you and available, so you can drill down into the details of those. But here we're going to decide essentially what depreciation or what date we're going to post our depreciation to. So I'm going to post it through my February posting period in this case. When I hit preview, it's going to do just what it says, which is create a preview. And it's going to group my assets together by their all-important item class, asset class. And it's going to just give me a quick preview for this period of what I'm expecting the posting to be. So I can see here from each of my trucks what it's planned to be. And it's as simple as entering my posting date. In this case, I want to post it as of today's date and hitting execute. When I do so, you can see that I now have a journal entry populated here in my depreciation run results. So I'm going to go down, drill down and take a look. And you can see what it did is it combined all $918 for that single asset class group and posted one journal entry for me. I didn't have to do any of the calculation to determine the amounts or exactly what date. It knew what to do for me, and it posted to the accounts that were set in my account determination earlier. So I have my depreciation expense, and I have my accumulated depreciation account here for my motor vehicles. And so if we had here multiple asset classes, then we'd have multiple journal entries for those asset classes. And last but not least, we want to take a look at what happens when you retire an asset. And specifically, we're going to do this through the AR invoice and retirement documents, like we're going to sell it. So we're gonna imagine here that we're ready to retire this asset or sell it. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna select my customer. And I'm going to enter that I'm going to sell my car asset. And of course, I'm going to enter a tax code and a price. Now, when I add this AR invoice, you're going to see that something similar happens from the capitalization. When I go back to my AR invoice and I right-click and view the relationship map, I can see that we have a retirement document here that SAP automatically posted for me. And if I drill in, we can kind of see the details about that. But again, it's going to, because it has this automatic creation, it's going to use a clearing account again. But you'll see the normal receivable, and then you'll see your retirement account, and this is based on your account determination settings. And quickly, I want to take a look at my car now and just show you that in the Fixed Assets tab, because I have retired it, it's now marked as inactive.
Lauren, we have a quick question here from Jackie.
Great.
How would you deal with a project where costs would be incurred over several months and then the whole asset capitalized once it's complete or when it's complete? I noticed BP project, but can you do that? You could have lots of invoices, so it would be a pain to do each individually.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jackie. We've actually toyed around a lot with the question, with a similar question, because I highly recommend that you don't put an asset into the asset master data until it is fully capitalized. So I'd really be happy to kind of take a look at it and get a more clear answer for you, because I know that's important, and I know that occurs for a lot of companies. So thank you for your question, and happy to get back to you on that. So if we take a look at our car again, it's marked as inactive. And just to kind of round out this topic of retirement, I want to go into the Fixed Assets folder under my Financials module and just quickly brief you that if it's not a sale of retirement, you do have the option for scrapping as well, and we have some information on that as well. Now, before we get out of our transactions here, I just want to highlight that there are a few additional things that we're not going to go in depth on right now. So that is a transfer. Allows you to transfer account classes and kind of balances between assets. There's also an asset revaluation so that you could change, for example, your depreciation method or your salvage value, or essentially what the value of your asset is, and you can change that, and that's usually posted at the end of the fiscal year. And then lastly, we have a fiscal year change. This one I am going to briefly touch on. It is very important. In Fixed Asset Management and SAP Business One, it is extremely important that you must execute a fiscal year change when the fiscal year ends. Essentially, for my CFOs and my controllers and accountants out there, it's just another task that you should probably add to your list of year-end items. But it's very simple, and what it does is essentially just calculates all of your balances and transfers them into the new fiscal year, not in terms of journal entry necessarily, but it's in terms of housing that balance on the asset master data. So it's going to kind of transfer your ending balance to your beginning balance in the asset master data, and it's going to recalculate your planned depreciation. But it's really simple. I can just show you right now that if we want to change from 2019 to 2020 and hit execute, It's as simple as that. And now my balances are going to be carried forward into 2020 in my asset master data. So again, this here, no journal entries, but just a very important step.
Thank you, Lauren. One more question from finance team at FOH. Would you please show again how the AP invoice process knows that the item is a fixed asset?
Yeah, no problem at all. That actually is as simple as having your asset be a part of the asset master data. So I know it's a little confusing between asset and item master data because they look very similar, but essentially it's just the fact that it's on your asset master data sheet instead of your item master data sheet. And if that's the case, SAP is going to automatically pick that up for you. I hope that answers your question. It's really as simple as that.
Yep, seems like it did. Thank you.
Great, no problem at all. All right, so just coming back to what we've done, if you recall, we enabled, our fixed assets, we've created our fixed assets, and we've ran through some transactions such as capitalization, depreciation, and retirement. And now that we have a few of these transactions, what we can do is we can take a look at SAP's out-of-the-box fixed asset reports. Of course, your balance sheet and your profit and loss, for example, are going to be kept up to date, as well as all of your general ledger accounts. They will be kept up to date by those transactions, but these are just some additional supplemental reports that we're going to quickly take a look at. Those fixed asset reports are, again, going to be in your fixed assets folder under fixed asset reports.
Of course, just to mention, those reports are going to be in addition to any balance sheet P&L. Of course, your fixed assets will be depreciated in real time in those reports, but those 4 reports provide you more granularity about what happens in different areas of fixed assets.
Yes. If I look at the first one, which is my asset depreciation forecast report, I have the ability to run this report by asset number or specific balance sheet account, depreciation areas, or dates. But when I run this report, it is essentially going to just show me for multiple items at a time what my planned depreciation is going to look like for that time period that I've selected. So if you remember, there was the tab on the asset master data that showed us for a single asset. This is really nice because you can look at it, kind of by a grouping level or all at once, and you can have that data right in front of you. The next report is the asset history sheet. This one is going to provide us historical transaction information for each of your balance sheet accounts for a selected date range. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select my motor vehicles and my time period. I'm going to select from the first to the end of the current fiscal year and run the report. And I'm going to really blow this up here, but what this does is it essentially acts as a depreciation schedule for each of your balance sheet accounts. So under my account here for all of my motor vehicles, I can see each of them listed, and it gives me a really nice look at when my capitalization was done, and throughout that period of time that I've defined, what the history looks like. So what was my accumulated depreciation at the start? How much did I accumulated? And what's my net book value now? So this is a really good supplement to your balance sheet account. Again, the balance sheet is going to keep up to date in real time, but this is just a great supplemental like subledger report that you can use. The next report is the asset status report. And this report essentially lets you look at different types of assets based on their statuses or specifically their classes. When I run this report, let's see here, I'm going to display all of my assets in this case. That's how this specific report runs. And I can see all of my assets. And if you remember on the overview tab on the asset master data, we had this very general information about each asset. And in this report specifically, it's just going to combine it all in one, which is really nice to see it all grouped together. You don't have to go to each individual asset. You can pull it And lastly, we have the asset transaction report. The asset transaction report is going to provide us with a list of all transactions relevant to an asset or a group of assets. And specifically, if I wanted to look at different transaction types, I could decide here which ones I want to look at. I'm going to run it for all in this case, but I can see per each individual asset exactly what fixed asset transactions in SAP occurred. I can see for my car, I had my acquisition and my retirement, and here I can see I had my acquisition or capitalization for both of my trucks. So overall, we kind of took a look at here the out-of-the-box fixed asset reports, and that was the depreciation forecast report, kind of looking and planning into the future. The asset history sheet, good supplemental report to your balance sheet. The status report, which gave us a pretty good overview of all of our assets, and then the transaction report, which was detailed down to the transactions in Business One.
That's great. Any questions so far?
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
This is Marta. Hi, you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yes, hi. The posting of the transactions, does that happen in real time in the background, or do you have to run a depreciation run every time in order for the asset to be posted to the GL?
Great question. Yes, you have to run a depreciation run, each period that you're interested in, depending on, how often you do at your company. But if you have a lot of fixed assets, it's really great because it groups them together and does the calculations and postings for you. As you saw, it was pretty easy as just kind of previewing and executing. So if you do that once a month, it's pretty easy, but then it does post those entries in real time. As soon as you execute the depreciation run. So you'll see those immediately populate in your balance sheet and your P&L.
So if I'm bringing a new asset, the AP invoice is not sufficient to post it to the balance sheet and start depreciating on its own. I have to do like a monthly journal entry, which is the depreciation run.
Yes, right? Yes, correct, okay. Correct. The depreciation run monthly will create that journal entry for you. But yeah, you have to execute it on a monthly basis.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question, Martha. So lastly, I just kind of wanted to leave you with some documentation here. We will add our blog post following this presentation. And as well, our recording of this presentation will be available on our YouTube channel, which I've included the link to. Also, just a very simple fixed assets video you can watch. And if you remember, I did point out that virtual item checkbox on the asset master data, and that's that last YouTube video. If you're interested, take a look. And if you have questions, you can let us know or let your project manager know. And of course, we have our link here to our LinkedIn tips and tricks group. We encourage you to join it to get some little tidbits that can be very helpful for just even a usability perspective. And if you are a part of that group, please feel free to share your tips and tricks as well. And of course, we do have Google here. So in summary, today we have gone over the configuration, enablement, and kind of setup of the fixed assets module, the creation manually or import of your fixed assets, and we've gone through some different transactions, including the capitalization, depreciation runs, and retirement. And last but not least, we looked at the out-of-the-box reporting that SAP brings for fixed assets. And now, if you do have any additional questions, we'd be happy to answer them at this time, or of course, drop them in the chat too.
And if you can now unmute yourself, ask any questions, or as Lauren said, drop them in the chat. And while you think of questions, or maybe there are no questions, I would like to greatly appreciate Lauren and thank you for a really great webinar. We're going to have additional webinars through the year. We are looking to do on analytics, on mobile app for SAP, different options of tax handling, credit card options, warehouse bin locations, bombs, and things of that nature, banking payment reconciliation. This is kind of the plan for the remaining of the year. If you do have specific items you'd like us to prepare a webinar for, please let us know either via email or call, and we'll be happy to include it.
Yes, thank you. Looking forward to the webinars coming up for the remainder of the year. We have some good topics, so I hope you'll join us.
All right, so I see there are no further questions. Any last words to summarize it, Lauren?
No, I mean, it's really a pretty straightforward module, but again, I would just share, if you have any questions or concerns, reach out to your project manager. We're happy to answer questions. The materials will be shared. And again, if it fits your business, it really is a great module. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Lauren, for again for an excellent webinar. Happy Friday, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.